Hi, my name's Lisa Dolan and I'm Assistant Head Teacher at Chiltern High School for Girls. Today my session is about making the most of data. And there is a lot of data out there which schools do use differently, but where it is well used, data can be a really powerful tool. So hopefully today I'm going to give you some food for thought. I've just included a link here to a short blog which looks at the benefits of data-driven education. And evidence suggests that when teachers do use data to drive their decisions and plans, that it helps them to respond, not react, but respond to problems more effectively. And current studies indicate that teachers in schools with data-focused programs think that using data improves instruction significantly. So what data should schools be using? Well, it's fair to say the amount of data we can and we do collect on students is quite simply vast. There is summative, formative and normative data, and that's at pupil level, class level, school level, across schools and at trust level. There's data setting learners' cognitive, metacognitive and social capacities, data on performance, behaviour, attendance and demography, predictive data, process data using microanalysis to understand how people learn. There's real-time and post-fact data, granular and aggregate data, and that is by no means a complete list. So is it any wonder that often teachers feel overwhelmed by data and sometimes perhaps even scared by the term data? So what data should schools be using, considering the vast quantities that are readily available to us and all the data that we can collect as a school? Well, unfortunately, I don't have the right or wrong answer to that, because it very much depends on the school themselves and what they want the data for. And that can quite often be governed by the context of the school or the profile of the school, historical data and patterns, and also by the school priorities themselves. Now, as I've previously mentioned, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of accessing as much data available and constantly assessing students to give us even more data, because it lures us into a bit of a false sense of security that we know our students and we know our school better. But the question that has to be asked is the data giving us the answers that we need? Is it giving us information that we are doing something with? Because if not, we have to then ask the question, what is the point of collecting it? When forming data strategies, the first question leaders and teachers should ask is not what do we need to collect, but rather, what do we want the data for? What information do we require? And once we've asked those questions, it's a case of working backwards, looking at the data that's available and ascertaining which data is useful and relevant and will give us that information or will give us those answers that we require. And data which does not meet those, it doesn't give us the information that we are requiring as a school, could simply be argued to be surplus and unnecessary. I'm now going to ask you to complete a short task. On the next slide, you're going to see a picture. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to scan the picture, and I want you to try and identify as many faces that you can see hidden in that picture as possible. Your 60 seconds starts now. "30 seconds left. And stop. So here are the answers to that task that you've just done. In the forest, there are actually 13 hidden faces. So if anybody managed to get all 13, well done. So now you've completed that task, I just want you to think about a question. And that is, what faces did you notice quicker? And just as importantly, why? Was it the larger faces? Was it the faces that stood out a little bit more because of the colour? Was it the faces that the colours contrasted a little bit more so they were more noticeable? Now I'm probably assuming it was the larger faces and those that stood out a little bit better, that were easier to find. And then the ones that were more difficult were the ones that kind of blended into the background, where the colours didn't stand out or contrast against each other, so it made it very difficult to distinguish the facial features. Well, I want you to now position yourself in a class in front of your young learners, because in fact it's very easy to notice the louder and possibly more challenging students in your class. It's easy to notice the students who may struggle. But what about those in the middle, the quieter students, those who just get on with it, those whose faces we don't deliberately miss, but we find ourselves perhaps overlooking because they do blend into the background, and because they don't stand out, and because they're not as loud, and because their character is not as big. Behind the data are young learners, and it was our job as teachers, as educators, to make sure that the data is used to ensure that none of the faces are missed. Using data well prevents students being missed, and it ensures that the needs of everyone is met. But single sources of data don't provide us with the full picture, and multiple measures of data, including other sources, must be used, and not just student assessment data. And that is to ensure that we meet the needs of everybody. And like with the task that you've just completed, we don't overlook students within our classes. So the data that's available to us can be split into one of four categories, and depending on your role and responsibility in the school, could determine which one is most relevant to you. So first you've got demographic data, and this is data that provides information about the school community and the students served in the community. And this is particularly important because it helps the school to recognise trends and patterns that may require a school to plan and to consider aspects that we do not have control over. Then you have student outcome data, and this is data used to determine the level of student achievement. And this data is particularly important because it helps the school to look at resources and materials that may improve outcomes even further, whilst planning for stronger programmes to support the needs of all learners, perhaps having taken into consideration the demographic data. Then you've got process and programme data, and this defines the programmes, the instructional strategies and classroom practices, the internal tracking systems. And this helps the school understand what teachers are doing to get the results, both good and bad. But it also enables us to review programmes and strategies and practices to further improve outcomes. And then you've got perception data. And this is data that tells us what students and parents and staff and others think about the learning environment. And this helps a school recognise the beliefs that are held about the environment, whether they're real or unreal. In June 2015, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation published the results of a survey it undertook which looked at teacher approaches to data. Based on that survey of over 4,000 teachers, it found that teachers tended to fit into one of 6 categories, and those categories range from data maven to traditionalists. The traditionalist teachers generally struggles to understand the data and the tools available to make the most of it. So they may become quite defensive when it comes to data, and rather than embracing it and engaging with it, they become less engaging. Then you've got the opposite end of the spectrum, the data maven, which is a teacher that takes a whole student approach and they use it to shape and inform all decisions. In an ideal world, we want our teachers, we want them to be in a position where they're data mavens rather than traditionalists, where they're embracing that data and they're taking that whole student approach to make sure there are no faces missed. This diagram shows you what data can look like in schools, and it very much links to the previous slide where we looked at different responses to data by different teachers, because depending on the response by teachers and the systems and routines that are implemented in a school can determine which approach a school is taken. So first of all, you've got the superficial data use approach, and this is where data is used inconsistently and or inappropriately in pockets without systematic procedures or expectations or any accountability. And as a result, that leads to little meaningful data. So this could be where you have got the traditionalists that are not confident with the data, where you haven't got systems in place where you're checking that the data is reliable and it's robust and therefore it's valid. Then you've got the systemic data use, and this is where data is used routinely at all levels to inform decisions and improvements directed at student outcomes. And as a result of that approach, it leads to a system where the data informs all decisions. So this is where you've got staff that are confident using data and making sense of it, that what they're inputting into the system is reliable and accurate, and therefore as a school that data can be used to inform all decisions that can be made. I think the reality is that no matter how hard you work within a school to support staff, you will always have some people that are a little bit more reluctant to engage with data for different reasons, and one possibly being that they're scared of it or they just simply don't understand it. There's that old saying again that the data is only as good as the person inputting it. So it's really important that staff are confident using the data, but more importantly, they understand what the data means. So they understand what they're inputting means to not just the individual and not just their class and not just their subject, but whole school level. It's important to support all parties in understanding the data. This includes teaching staff, department leaders, teaching assistants, the leadership team, school governors, students, parents and carers. Anyone that has access to that data should be able to interpret it and understand it and make sense of it. And as I said, we have to empower our staff and all parties to be able to do that. For our school at Chiltern High School for Girls, we offer various forms of support, and it's quite a bespoke programme dependent upon the audience and the level required. And we invest that time, effort and energy because we are really passionate about making sure that our staff are confident in using and understanding that data. So this is some of the data that we collect in our school. When we all return in September, we ask all of our heads departments to do a full exam analysis, and that's to be able to give them a picture of what worked particularly well so they can continue to drive it forward, but areas where they need to possibly develop or particular gaps between student groups and potentially teaching groups as well. We look at contextual data of each year group and we share that with all of our staff. And the idea behind that is that they've got a profile for every single year group in the school, all on one page. Our Year 7s undertake CATS tests and we use these to identify any anomalies between those and the SATs. And we also use this information to identify students that might need some SEND support. We also select a number of students in Year 8 and 9 who undertake the CATS again, and that's to do comparisons to previous results we've had to therefore measure impact. We run reading tests throughout the whole of the school, and that's from Year 7 through to Year 11, and staff access that and use that information when planning their lessons. Then throughout the year we undertake 3 formal data captures for Year 7, 8, 9 and 10 and 4 for Year 11. Following those data captures, there is an expectation that departments undertake an analysis of the data together, so looking at what the data actually shows and therefore responding to that data. Over the duration of the year, departments undertake 1 formal piece of assessed work every half term, and that piece of work has to be moderated and standardised within the department. That way we can ensure that the data is more valid, more reliable and more secure. And then the departments have their own tracking systems to catch the progress of students throughout the year, and they have a choice to select what these are and the means. So for example, a presentation, a test, an extended piece of writing. I think it's important again just to point out that the data that you use has got to have a purpose. It's got to give you the information that you require as a school, because surplus data can be just as harmful as insufficient data or low quality data. It can obviously waste teachers' precious time, and teachers who cannot see the use of collecting the data will justifiably become frustrated. So rather than embracing the data, you could end up with low quality data or data that's not reliable. It can also cloud significant opportunities which data offers and reinforce the belief that data is collected solely for reporting purposes, and that isn't the reason why data should be collected. The data should be collected to give you the information you need about the young learners that you're teaching, and therefore to be able to respond to that and respond as a school to give those students the best possible chances in life. Perhaps most importantly, surplus data can have a detrimental effect if, for example, we use it to band and group pupils unnecessarily, therefore exacerbating cognitive and unconscious biases. So how should schools collect and share their data? Well, this very much depends on the school again and the systems they have in place. At Chiltern High School for Girls, we capture our data electronically and we upload it onto CISRA, which is the system that we use. And we do that within 48 hours of the deadline closing. And we do it as quickly as that because it gives staff access to the data very, very quickly, and therefore they're able to respond to it quicker and less time is lost. So if some sort of support or intervention has got to be put into place for certain students, we do not lose time. Once the data has been uploaded, departments allocate some of their meeting time for all of their staff to analyse their own groups before they then analyse it collaboratively. And we're very passionate about that at our school. It shouldn't just be down to the head department to analyse the data and therefore understand what it's suggesting about their subjects. All staff have to be involved because at the end of the day, individual teachers are responsible for the progress their students are making. So we have to make sure that our staff are confident in doing that. So they analyse their own groups and then collaboratively they work as a subject group to actually then respond to that data. And I say respond because it's particularly important because you shouldn't react to the data. It's about taking a step back, looking at what it's suggesting and then coming up with strategies to bring about improvements. When the next data capture is then taken, we use that information to evaluate the response and to see how effective it has been. And if it has been effective, that's absolutely great. But if it hasn't, that's also okay. We take that step back, we reassess, and potentially we might have to respond in a slightly different way. And there's a quote here below that kind of is quite poignant. And it's not about the assessment, it's about doing something about the results. And that's the approach that we take in our school. We don't want a subject update to just seem as though it's just a tick box exercise, because actually it's not completing the update. It's what departments and teachers do after that update in that analysis. So we share the data with a number of different people. Obviously we share it with the students because if the students understand the progress they're making, and we do a lot of work with them in this school around what the data is actually showing about the progress they're making, then they are likely to be more successful learners. Equally, parents and carers may be able to better support their children if they also understand what the data is showing them. So again, we do work with our parents and our carers to support them in making sense of the data as well. Departments also are encouraged to share good practice and to support each other. We share the data with our governors and we also share it with our school trust, Chiltern Learning Trust. And we do believe that, the feedback needs to be delivered in the correct way, because any data-driven feedback delivered in the wrong way, it can discourage pupils from engaging with the data and it can risk promoting a fixed mindset and the students actually thinking they can't when in fact they can if they know what it is they've got to do to overcome any barriers or to improve progress. So how has making the most of data work for us? Well, it's given us a consistent approach to how we use the data, analyse the data, and it's particularly helped us when it comes to promoting effective self-evaluation and also high standards of teaching and learning, because it gives us the information to allow informed professional discussions with key partners to take place. And some of those discussions are with people like the governors, parents and staff themselves. It also enables us to identify students' achievement and helps us with our target setting, whilst at the same time enables us to monitor progress towards those targets as well. It also helps us to monitor the effectiveness of targeted support and interventions and respond depending on what the data is showing us. It helps us to support the allocation of staffing and resources and to also challenge the aspirations of staff, students and parents. Now in our school, our staff have developed a good understanding of the range of data available, and this understanding has given them the confidence to plan for continuous school improvement. And the effective use of that school data has contributed towards the school's capacity to improve. As you've heard throughout this presentation, there are lots of different approaches when it comes to data and making the most of data. But there's one key thing that's really important to make the use of data successful in every school, and that is you must work as a team. The T stands for taking time to build the foundation and empower staff. So work with your staff, give them the confidence, do the training that might be required, and that might be at different levels, and it might be bespoke depending on the member of staff and their experience. But if you empower the staff and you give them the confidence when it comes to data, they will engage. Make the data meaningful and purposeful. So select the data that gives you the outcomes, it gives you the objective that you're trying to achieve from it, and make sure it's just not a tick box exercise. E, engage with all parties by having data-driven dialogue. So when you've given the staff the confidence to be able to engage with the data, don't shy away with having those conversations with people you're working with. A, all work together to improve instruction and support each other, because everybody is going to need different levels of support when it comes to data. And M, monitor the implementation and results, and don't be afraid to change and refine. If it's not working, if you continue with the same system or the same approach, it's not going to bring about better outcomes. So don't be afraid to stop and just review and change if that's required. Thank you for listening today.